Did you use any weapons while on missions? And if so, what firearm weapon did you typically use?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I was assigned. Everybody is assigned uh, a uh, a 9 millimeter semi-automatic handgun. When I first was at the CIA and first going through the handgun training, it was a Browning 9 millimeter. The Browning was I had trouble with the Browning, but for whatever reason, the hammer would kind of fly back and hit me right in the webbing between my thumb and my forefinger, and I would end up with just my hand soaked in blood. Uh, they dropped the Browning and they went to the Glock. The Glock shot like butter. And so I qualified first on the Browning and then on the Glock, carried the Glock everywhere. And then we also had a Smith & Wesson snub nose 38 revolver that I kept on my ankle. And then for home protection, they gave us a Remington pump action 12 gauge shotgun. But I never carried the shotgun anywhere, never took it on a mission. Always with the Glock and the 38, occasionally just the Glock, but always also with two extra magazines stuffed to the gills. So I always had, let me think, 34, 41 rounds, and then five more on my ankle just in case things really turned to shit. And thankfully, I never had to fire a shot in anger or self-defense.
What firearm that you used in the field was your favorite, if you had to pick one?
Oh, I love that Glock. In fact, when I got home from Pakistan, my father-in-law gave me a Glock 9 millimeter for Christmas, and loved it. Would go to the range shooting all the time. Took my sons shooting, my brother-in-law, my friends, and then when I was arrested, on the day of my arrest, a federal judge made me turn in my Glock and never saw it again.
So to kind of bring it back to the class a little bit and surveillance, counter surveillance, obviously the firearm that an intelligence agent is carrying can identify what country they're from. Did you ever have to learn how to use a weapon that's, would not reveal that or, some strange weapon?
We also qualified with the Kalashnikov, which I'll tell you, the Russians are very proud of because it's got like four pieces to it. It just, blip, 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 there, it's put together, AK-47. But it has such a vicious recoil that after a day of training on it and then qualifying at the end of the day, we all had these massive bruises right here where your shoulder meets your chest. It was just wicked. And then the M4 assault rifle, the thing barely moves. Like I said, butter with the 9 millimeter earlier. Oh my God, the M6, it's like the most wonderful gun ever made. So we did both of those, and then we also did the German Luger, which was very easy. That was a 380, very very easy to qualify on.
And Carrie asked in the chat, which model Glock was that?
That was the Desert Eagle,
Okay,
which I
amazing.
loved very much.
Cool.
I hate to even say it's Israeli made, but they really got it right.
Okay, another question from the CIA crypto coin folks. Are these AI companies like Palantir changing how intel agencies operate?
Yes, absolutely, positively, yes. Um, we learned just last week that some kind of new crazy AI system was used to locate the downed pilot, and that whatever system Palantir came up with, like my brain can't even wrap itself around the technology, was attached to a drone that kind of circled the pilot until he was rescued and could even detect his heartbeat. It was so incredibly precise. So while CIA drones and an F-15 and an A-10 Warthog were elsewhere drawing the Iranians away from the location of the pilot, the CIA was using AI on another drone to locate the pilot to ensure that he was safe, and then to guide the rescuers in to make the rescue. Incredible. But I'll repeat something that I've said on other podcasts too, and that is that I can't even comprehend how a CIA officer or any intelligence officer really is able to transit airports or cross borders in alias with all of the facial recognition software that is being used today and the AI. I had 6 different identities on 6 different passports from 6 different countries. I wouldn't dare use one of those fake passports today with all of the advances in technology. I just don't know how people do it.
Yeah, that ghost murmur technology they talked about with quantum crystals and all that stuff for the heartbeat. Yeah, I think we're gonna find out it might be a little overblown, but we'll see. 40 miles out seems like a bit much, but
Yeah, like Star Trek kind of stuff.
yeah, but who knows? I mean, things obviously that are, sci-fi back then are so commonplace now we don't even think about them. So who knows?
Yeah.
Okay, another question here. What's your perspective on how Iran's protests evolved from relatively peaceful to more chaotic, and to what extent external involvement may have contributed to that shift?
Tell you the truth, I think it's mostly external involvement. And the reason I say that is that, number one, the Israelis could not help themselves but to brag to the Israeli media, which then dutifully reported it, that the Mossad was responsible for instigating those protests. Number one. Number two, the protesters attacked mosques, which makes no sense at all, and they attacked fire stations and set fire to 38 fire trucks. Why would you do that? And then why would they set fire to mosques? No, on purpose, because the fire trucks no longer existed; they had been burned. That's something that an outside agitator would do, and the Israelis dutifully bragged about it. Number one. Number two, we've been seeing massive protests in Iran, hundreds of thousands of people in the streets as recently as 2 days ago in support of the government. So this notion that the Iranian regime was a house of cards and was ready to just collapse upon the firing of the first missile, that was nothing more than Israeli propaganda, and Donald Trump fought it. The Ayatollahs. Let me add one thing, because I want to be very clear about this. The Ayatollahs tried. I'm not going to say that. I have had very serious personal problems with Iran over the years, to the point where my life was actively in danger because of the Iranians. I have no love for the Iranian government. But there was never any possibility that the United States and Israel would be seen as liberators. The only possibility, and this has come to pass, is that the United States and Israel are seen as invaders and occupiers. Let's say you don't like Donald Trump, and then the Russians invade to overthrow Donald Trump. Are you going to just applaud, or are you going to fight the Russians? Of course you're going to fight the Russians. And that's what we're seeing in Iran today.
Yeah, and do you think the numbers that have been talked about for the executions of protesters, do you buy those numbers, or?
No. In fact, I don't think anybody buys those numbers except the most ardent pro Reza Pahlavi activists in places like Beverly Hills and Orange County, California. No, listen, when you've got estimates ranging from 3,000 dead to 90,000 dead, and the ones saying 55,000 and 90,000 are based in London and Washington and are funded by the American government, then no, you can't respect those numbers.
Yeah, now this is a pretty familiar playbook, of course. 1979, very similarly, it seems like the CIA was purposefully sort of fomenting, protests and things like that. how much is that just standard practice? Like, you become an agent, do you learn about those things? You learn about the best way to be a part of those things? How does that work?
No, actually, that's a good question. No, the answer is no. In most cases, people are just winging it. And, this is one of the dangerous things about covert action. I've always said, having been I'm ashamed to say, an integral part of the invasion of Iraq back in 2003, 2002 and 2003. It's easy to invade a country. It's easy to overthrow a government. It is almost impossible to get out cleanly, especially when, like the CIA, you don't have an exit strategy. You get these orders from the White House, overthrow Saddam Hussein. Okay, that's actually pretty easy. When you send 175,000 troops and you bomb them back into the Stone Age, it's easy to overthrow Saddam Hussein. But then what do you do? What do you do in a country that has no democratic history, or a country like Afghanistan that doesn't want to be a democracy? They had their own functioning form of government called the Loya Jirga. They don't want a democracy. They don't want a parliament. They don't want some guy from Baltimore named Hamid Karzai to come and be their, president for life. And so that's one thing the CIA just doesn't understand, that sometimes they're not seen as the good guys.
So to sort of bring this back to tradecraft a little bit, and some of the content we've been talking about in the course, you were in Pakistan, obviously, running a major operation there, to put it mildly, and you, of course, were working with the local population quite a bit, I'm sure, for information, et cetera, et cetera. Um, let's say, how did you sort of learn on the fly if there's not really this good way to learn about the population? They drop you in there and you've got to learn who to trust, how to trust them with certain information, whether they're going to turn on you, et cetera, et cetera. How do you figure that out?
Forgive me, but I'm going to give you something of a long answer, a two-part answer.
Yeah.
Number one, you learn to ignore a lot. For example, I had to establish a liaison relationship with a brigadier general in central Pakistan. I always had, sacks of money. And so I go to the general and I said, General Muhammad, I need this, I need that, and I need the other thing. And he's like, oh, okay, yes, of course, we can do that. I need new carpeting in my office and a new refrigerator, and I need a new car. Okay, I don't want to give him any of that stuff. I want him to say, yes, of course, John, we're in this together. I'm happy to do whatever you want. But I bought him a car and a refrigerator, and I recarpeted his office because that was the path of least resistance. I hated doing that. I bought 6 sets of night vision goggles, not the kind you find on Temu. I bought 6, $5,000 sets of night vision goggles. And then he says, you will, of course, be gifting the night vision goggles. And I was like, sure, just take the fucking night vision goggles. I don't care. So long as you do what I tell you to do, you can keep the fucking night vision goggles. And then at the end of it, after we caught Abu Zubaydah, he wanted a $10,000 cash bonus. And I said, General, with all due respect, you have shaken me down since the moment I got off the plane. I'm not giving you $10,000 in cash. I'm just not going to do it. But then they said, well, the State Department has a $10 million bounty on Abu Zubaydah, and you couldn't have caught Abu Zubaydah without our cooperation. I said, fine. I cabled headquarters. I said, what do you want me to do? They said, just give him the 10 million. And so, we put it in giant duffel bags and took it over to ISI headquarters. We gave it to the director of ISI. And to his credit, he didn't steal, very much of it. They ended up building a new headquarters. They bought a plot of land. They built this giant new headquarters with our 10 million. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, how do you get out of it? You can't get out of it. I've told the story a number of times, but it's apropos of this conversation, where it was the night before we invaded Iraq. It was the last, what's called a principals committee meeting. So the principals committee is normally chaired by the president, and the attendees are the vice president, the national security advisor, the secretary of state, the secretary of defense, the chairman of the joint chiefs, and the vice chairman. In this case, the head of CENTCOM and the two senior directors at the NSC for the Middle East, plus the CIA director. And they all have their own note takers. So I was the CIA director's note taker. We were the only ones in our secure conference room. George Tenet was sitting at the table like this. I'm sitting directly behind him. And then, for whatever reason, the president didn't attend that meeting. So it was chaired by Vice President Cheney. And he had his people and his note taker, and Rumsfeld had his guy, and Colin Powell had his guy, and Condi Rice had her guy, and a couple of people from the National Security Council, and then the chairman and vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And so we're sitting there, and Vice President Cheney starts off the meeting by asking General Tommy Franks, the commander of Central Command, General Franks, please give us the order of battle briefing. And I've mentioned a number of times, I hate order of battle briefings. They are so boring and so irrelevant. I never have gotten anything out of an order of battle briefing. An order of battle briefing is they put up a map, and they have these little dots on them, and they're like elements of the 2nd Mountain Cavalry Division are here at 20 clicks west of this village, and then the armored commando battalion is here. And I don't care where the little men are on the map. It's going to change in 15 minutes anyway. Who cares? Just put your men where you need them, and then attack, and then come back to us and tell us how the attack was. That was always my position. Of course, I was nobody, so I never said that out loud. In any event, at the very end of his order of battle briefing, literally the last thing that General Franks said was, if all goes as planned, we can be in Tehran by August. Now, this was the night before we attacked Iraq, which was like February, maybe March 2002. If all goes as planned, we can be in Tehran by August. And George discreetly leans forward, turns off his microphone, and goes like this. Did he say Baghdad or did he say Tehran? And I said, he said Tehran. And George said, have these people lost their minds? And then he turned his microphone back on and just kind of sat there like this. So as the vice president closes the meeting, one of these idiots from the NSC stood up, and he's walking past the microphone to walk out of the White House Situation Room. And he says, when we cross that border tomorrow, they're going to throw flowers at us. And I go back to the deputy director's office. I was the deputy director's executive assistant. I go back to the deputy director's office, and he says, how was the briefing? And I said, did you know we were going to invade Iran? And he goes, are they still talking about that? We're not going to invade Iran. And I said, this idiot from the NSC said they're going to throw flowers on us tomorrow when we cross the border. I said, do these people know nothing about history? And he said, no, they know nothing about history. Now think of all the invasions that we have initiated, all the military attacks, unprovoked military attacks that we've initiated over the last 50 years. And 50 years puts us in the mid-70s. And how is it that we never learned any lesson from any of this? How is it that we never learned that you have to have an exit strategy? There has to be a goal. The goal can't be overthrow Saddam Hussein, overthrow the Ayatollahs. Okay, that's the easy part. Then what do you do? And all these years, nobody's ever been able to say, then what do we do?
Yeah, I see we've got a question here in the chat, but we'll get to that in a little bit. I just want to sort of get a nice core of discussion going here to kind of build on. I think the folks who ask you about Palantir and these other sort of military contractors, I think one of the big questions that I see, and I'm certainly asked, is, how much influence those private sector contractors, those big think tanks have on what the intelligence agencies do. I've been to Tyson's Corner. It's obviously a huge sort of Silicon Valley type place now. Um, you go to these things with MITRE and Lockheed, and they do these huge presentations, and they have all these plans drawn up and talk about all this technology. Does that just go somewhere in like a filing cabinet and nobody looks at it, or when there's a big action, are those folks consulted directly?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a tough one. Um, they are consulted as needed. If we need the technology for a specific action, for a specific operation, yes, they'll be brought in as contractors. Green badge, blue badge is staff, green badge is contractor, but contractor cleared at the TSSCI, the top secret, special compartmented information, special intelligence talent keyhole gamma level is what it's called. TSSCI SITK gamma. So it's the same clearance that anybody at the CIA has, minus specific compartments. So they'll be brought in for a specific operation or in order to use or teach us to use a specific technology. And then we say, okay, thank you very much. You can go back to Tyson's Corner now. We don't need you anymore. So nobody would be privy to the entire operation. Nobody from outside the building would be privy to the entire operation. That would be internal only.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. And that's a lot to digest for somebody who's not all those acronyms and everything. Those clearance levels are, wild.
Oh, it's just awful.
Okay.
Awful.
Two more questions here from the CIA crypto coin folks, and then we'll move into sort of we're going to talk about how teams stage movement and so on. And then we'll get to some other content from the course here. But first, I think you've been asked this before, but I'll give it a little bit of a riff. But what's your favorite spy movie, and what's your least favorite spy movie?
The least favorite's easy. And I'm ashamed to tell you I was a consultant on it. It's called From Paris with Love, and it starred what's his name? The pilot, A-list star. What's his name? From Welcome Back, Kotter.
John Travolta?
John Travolta. Thank you. Sorry. It stars John Travolta, who's like this grizzled, seasoned CIA operative, and something what the British guy. He's kind of the young, green CIA first tour CIA officer, and they're in Paris, and they're just like driving through Paris at ridiculously high speeds in a limo. And Travolta is standing up through the sunroof with machine guns in both arms and just firing with both arms at the same time. It's like, come on, you guys, what are you doing? Bad, bad, bad. The worst CIA-related TV show was 24. Well, that's not true. An even worse one was called Covert Affairs that lasted a season or two on CBS. Embarrassingly bad. Where like this analyst just walks into the Oval Office like she owns the place. And she goes, Madam President, of course the president is a black woman. Madam President, I need to take out a hit on someone. And the president says, sit down, let's discuss. It's like, what? No, first of all, you're both going to prison because that's a felony on both your parts. Executive Order 12333 specifically says that you can't do that. That is a felony. So that was like so unbelievably bad. It was unwatchable. And this analyst is supposed to be like a briefer, and she's out like doing hits. 24. Oh my God. Jack Bauer jumps out of the Washington Metro at the Arlington Cemetery station, which is like the least used station on the entire line. And he's got a gun and he's going like this. It's like, dude, you're surrounded by 30 tourists. First of all, you never hold your gun up like that. You hold it down. So you don't shoot yourself in the face, which is the first thing they teach you in the first hour of the first day of handgun training. And number two, you're a CIA officer wielding a gun in public, you're under arrest. You can't do that. You're not an FBI agent. And even if you were, the FBI doesn't do that. So yeah, you're under arrest too. The best movies, Argo was 100% accurate. It was incredible. Bridge of Spies, 100% accurate, also incredible. Um, and another one that was mostly right on was called The Recruit. Came out 20 years ago, starring Colin, what's his face, the Irish guy, and Al Pacino. The only thing that they exaggerated in that movie was they didn't beat us in training. Training was rough, but they didn't beat us, and they beat him in training. Otherwise, they were right on. I just happened by coincidence to go to that movie in the theater with 5 other CIA people. We were all active duty CIA people. We went out for beers one night and somebody said, "Hey, let's go see this movie. I heard it's pretty good." So we went to see it. It was so good that we all sat there through the credits just to see who their advisor was. And they didn't have an advisor. So how they were able to get it that close to the truth was really something.
Yeah, possible they didn't list them, right? Somebody in the chat here said the show 24, it wildly propped up torture. Obviously, you have opinions on that.
Absolutely. 24 and Zero Dark 30, which was like the worst of all the worst movies, just because it also falsely propped up the torture program. 24 perpetuated that fiction of the ticking time bomb. There is no such thing as the ticking time bomb. It's never happened in real life. It never would happen in real life. It's a complete fabrication made up in Hollywood, and it did help to perpetuate the torture program. Correct.
Okay. One more question here from the CIA crypto coin folks, and this is about crypto a little bit. So how does it feel knowing that you're officially on the blockchain forever?
Darn. Yeah, I like it a lot. I find myself checking the website like every day. And yeah, it's fun. I like it. And I'm flattered and I'm grateful. These guys have been very kind to me and very proactive. And I'm really grateful for it.